I was born to two drug-addicted parents that met in rehab. It wasn't long thereafter that my father decided to rob a bank. I ended up in a federal penitentiary in Texarkana, Texas. Ultimately, we were taken away by the state and placed in a shelter in San Antonio, Texas. It took a long time to get past really being able to enjoy Christmas because of that memory. Mentally abused, physically abused, a very early influential age. I got to know how to balloon heroin, how to cut it up, hide it in my mouth as we went around the city streets of San Antonio. He would say, hey, if we ever get stopped, I need you to swallow this, can't go back to jail. Proving everybody wrong. It was during the application process for DPS that I learned for the first time as I'm sitting there with a recruiter. He said, your dad's a bank robber, your mom's a prostitute. 2012. It was at that time where I could no longer run from the demons. Is when depression set in and thoughts of suicide lingered, and alcohol was now becoming my friend. And in 2019, when COVID hit, I again was promoted and we went to McAllen, Texas, where that position oversaw McAllen, Brownsville, and Corpus. 21 counties, roughly 150 people, a couple $1 million budget. And my son, who's 8, is overhearing this conversation. He goes, hey, Dad, I got an idea. And I said, what's that, son? He says, why don't you just be a dad?
Today, my guest is Richard T. Sanchez, a retired DEA Assistant Special Agent at Charge and former Texas State Trooper who spent nearly 3 decades leading complex narcotics and border operations. Richard, it's an honor to have you here. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I know that you had a difficult childhood. If you want to share all of the challenges that you had to go through, please go ahead and share what you got.
I was born to drug-addicted parents that met in rehab. After my birth, we moved to a small town outside of San Antonio called Floresville, Texas. And there, my paternal grandparents had provided a home for my mom and dad and myself. And it wasn't long thereafter that my father decided to rob a bank and ended up in a federal penitentiary in Texarkana, Texas. And my mom, at that point, decided to leave Floresville. And we moved around a bit around the San Antonio, Texas area, living with her parents and in and out of different places until she ended up having my brother. And again, her lifestyle didn't change very much. And ultimately, we were taken away by the state and placed in a shelter in San Antonio, Texas. And by that time, I was in first grade, and my brother was a newborn. My paternal grandparents came and got us. My brother and I being from different fathers, my grandmother didn't want us separated. So she did the right thing and kept us together and raised my brother as her own child, and raised me as her own child as well. And we moved to Floresville. And during that time, we were enrolled in school, and my grandmother and grandfather had 6 children, my father being the eldest. And the two that followed my father, my 2 uncles, were also in and out of prison and heroin addicts.
How old were you when you were placed in shelter?
I would be around 5 or 6, somewhere around there.
What did you feel, if you can remember, when you were separated from your parents, put in shelter? A lot of uncertainty as a child. And then when your grandparents took you back.
The biggest memory that I have that is kind of is a trigger for me is Christmas time. The song Feliz Navidad was a song that for whatever reason resonates in my brain when that time frame we were in the shelter. And I remember, my brother being brought in, again, he was just a newborn, and they bring him in, they sit him next to me, and there's this, Christmas activities that are going on inside the shelter. And, it took a long time to get past really being able to enjoy Christmas because of that memory, and then once we got to Floresville, it was a transition. I missed my mother dearly, wanted nothing more than to be with my mom. We grew up very poor. We didn't have to be, but because, there was drug addicts in our house that, would, pillage through the canned goods and sell them and, take all the stuff that we had of any value to go sell it so they could get their fix. So it created a lot of uncertainty. It created a lot of dissent with my grandfather. It created a lot of anger for him, and unfortunately, I bore the blunt of a lot of that anger. Was mentally abused, physically abused, and the temperament of him and my grandfather, and his crushing words. Uh, I didn't really, I guess, have a lot of hope per se. Um, so it was tough. It was a tough environment. It was a tough situation. The town was very, very small, or is still very, very small. And because of the reputation of my family, we weren't going to be able to play with the most affluent children in the town. And uh, again, You're labeled not only in the community when you're riding your bike around, or you're out somewhere, but you're also labeled in the school. So, we were set up for failure.
Someone told you that you would never become anyone. It was probably hard to hear as a child. Did you reconnect with your father after he got back from prison?
The way it works when you're in prison, and you're getting ready to be released, you got to provide a residence of where you're going to go. So your probation officer has the ability to account for your actions and do their check-ins, and that for my father as well as my uncles was my grandparents' house, and that's where they all came back to. But going back to what you said about, being belittled and barraged, it was my grandfather that used to always tell us, we weren't worth anything and we were never going to be anything. And those were the words that resonated throughout my life. And later on, and as an adult even. But meeting my father for the first time, he used to send me prison letters quite regularly. And within those prison letters were handkerchiefs, handkerchiefs drawn out that, I took a lot of pride in, and um, that I held as my own, and I knew it was something that wouldn't be taken from me. So I used to put them on my wall as a badge of honor, and you know, check the mail all the time to see if my father had written me a letter. So the first time I got to meet him, I was in junior high, and he was released from prison, and first place he came was to my grandparents' house, and uh, my grandmother would allow me to go and spend the weekends with him, or days with him, as he started venturing out to San Antonio. It didn't take him long, and shortly thereafter he got back in the game, and in the heroin game, and I was right there next to him. So it was at a very early influential age that I got to know how to balloon heroin, uh how to cut it up, how to, hide it in my mouth as we went around the city streets of San Antonio selling it into the projects. And, it was during that time that he would say, "Hey, if we ever get stopped, I need you to swallow this, can't go back to jail." So I took a lot of pride in making my dad, a proud father.
Did your father get arrested again for that? And what happened to you after that?
So, I continued to live in my grandparents' house, and once my father was gone, and living in San Antonio, one of my uncles had been released at that time as well, and they would come pick me up on a Friday after school, and then I'd spend all weekend with them in San Antonio. And that went on for about a year or so, and it wasn't, during that time frame, my dad was ultimately rearrested and put back into the Bexar County Jail. We did not have a phone in my grandparents' house. We didn't have air conditioning. Like I said, we grew up as what we didn't know at the time, of course, was um, not, I guess, kind of poor. Um, and it was my next door neighbor who was my second grandmother, uh, who received a phone call from my dad, and so I went. She used to call out the window real loud, so I knew when she was calling, it was a phone call. So I went over, and it was my dad on the phone, and he had told me he had been arrested, and man, it was just like it was a major kick in the gut. I mean, here it was, this man that I had never been around. My mom was in and out of the picture, and really had nothing to hold on to. And my home at with my grandparents was very unstable, and was an anger-ridden house. And so my weekends away were one of the things I look forward to. And knowing that my father was in jail again, it was crushing.
And then you met a man by the name Ray Perez. Could you tell me that story?
As my father became in and out of prison um, during the next couple years, you know, my vulnerability and the ability to become vulnerable, I shut it off. That was the only way I could protect myself from reoccurring damages and getting hurt. And so I learned how to turn off my emotions um, way before that with my grandfather's words and actions. And I just became numb to that type of treatment. So I was able to compartmentalize things real well. And then my next door neighbor, as I previously mentioned, her son and my dad were very good friends, and they were in the drug game together. And he had a son that was significantly older than me. They ended up in a fight one night, and I happened to be there. In the small towns, state troopers are notorious for showing up and helping out the smaller police departments, and that's what happened here. And Ray happened to be the nephew to my next door neighbor, and he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, man, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "Well, Albert, the son, asked me to come over and watch him beat up his dad, so I'm here." And he's like, "Richard, you're going down the wrong path. He said, I just promoted, and I'm going to Harlingen, Texas. Why don't you come spend some time with me down there and my family? During the daytime, you can watch. You had two daughters, small children at the time. You can watch them during the day, and at night you can ride with state troopers." So I thought, well, I didn't. Okay, what else am I going to do? So I went down there, and had it not been for divine intervention and God looking over me, I mean, who gives a young man that opportunity, especially being the father of two young girls, and so it was a lot of admiration to him and a lot of kudos for giving me that opportunity. And it kind of started from there. So I went to Harlingen. I stayed down there for, I think it was a spring break week. And I got to ride with troopers. And I made a decision at that time that and I needed to get my life together and get a plan. And by that time, I was already a sophomore in high school. And so I had to look for a job. Um, and in Floresville, there's not a lot of places to find a job. It's a very small convenience store. There wasn't a Walmart at the time. There was no major grocery stores. So you had a couple different eateries if you were lucky to get a job. So I started roofing with a friend of mine's brother. And then I went into the local Dairy Queen, where it took a bit of convincing to the manager because she would not hire a male. And after several trips and filling out the application, she finally gave me an opportunity. And I worked at Dairy Queen for a couple years, and then Walmart opened up and was able to get into Walmart making a 25 cents more an hour. So I took that on. And um, during this interim, my father's in and out of prison. My mom I haven't seen in a long time, and we didn't have any contact at all. And my grandfather's still alive, and my uncles are in and out of the house. So there's a lot going on. And again, being able to compartmentalize, my goal and mission was to stay away from home as long as I could during the day, only use that place to go to sleep, and then work on what I needed to work on to give me a future.
You had to numb your emotions and compartmentalize. Is that something that you have continued to do your whole life, or at some point you had to learn that this is not the best way to do it?
So as I went through life and ultimately getting hired by the Texas Department of Public Safety as a 21-and-a-half-year-old kid, I was able to keep those emotions and those feelings pent up in a closet per se. Um, and the same high that my parents chased, I now had the opportunity to chase in a different way. And that way was proving everybody wrong, proving the naysayers that always told me I would never have a chance, that I would never amount to anything, that I was going to be like my parents. It gave me something to really fight for and against. And it was during the application process for DPS that I learned for the first time as I'm sitting there with a recruiter, and he goes, "You know, Richard, I don't think we're going to be able to hire you." And I said, "Well, why not?" He's looking at this stack of papers, and at the time I didn't know what they were. And it was the criminal history of my father and mother. And he said, "You know, your dad's a bank robber. He's a attempted murder, distribution of drugs, possession of firearms, assault with a deadly weapon." And then my mom, he goes, "Your mom's a prostitute. She's got umpteen arrests for prostitution." And at that time, I remember sitting in the chair trying to do everything I could to convince this individual that had 20 years on the job in the highway patrol that why he needed to hire me. And I'm faced with hearing this for the first time, that your mom's a prostitute. And you think back and you go, is this the fight or flight that is gonna come out of me? You know, I was a fighter. I'd always been in fights in high school, and I'd always been in trouble. And it took every ounce of energy to not want to run out of that room and run from the situation that I was just faced with. I love my mother very much. Um, and hearing that was quite shocking. And he goes, "Well, give me one good reason why I should send your application forward." And at that time, I'd established a reputation of riding with the troopers. I knew a lot of them. I said, "Listen, just don't judge me based on that of my blood, but if you're going to judge me based on what I've done as a person." And that was good enough for him to justify sending my application through the process. So as we fast forward now to being on the highway and running from those demons, I guess you could say, that have plagued me and been a part of my background for so long. uh, when I applied to the Drug Enforcement Administration, I went through the same process again, having to prove myself and validating why I needed to be hired and why I should be given a chance. Um, so I had to again tell the recruiter why, and I was able to get through the process. As I bounced around, I was hired, went to Laredo, and then Laredo, San Antonio, and Colombia, South America, where I had proven everybody wrong by this point. All the naysayers, all the people that were judgmental of me, that hated the fact that I had gone into law enforcement, that I had not turned out like my parents. Um, I have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. I had gotten a degree by that time. Um, was in the hornet's nest of drug traffickers. Um, I'd been on National Geographics a couple times, so it was for me. It was the highlight and pinnacle of my career. I came back to San Antonio in 2012, and it was at that time where I could no longer run from the demons. They had surfaced, and is when depression set in, and thoughts of suicide lingered, and alcohol was now becoming my friend, and um, it was just that high that I had chased for so long, and the demons that I had run from had caught up to me.
You managed to redirect that chasing the high feeling that you've had probably in you ever since your childhood into the good. You were on the other side. You were a state trooper for many years, worked in the DEA. What did you feel when you first became a state trooper? Did you feel proud of yourself, or you felt satisfied that you managed to prove some of those people wrong, or maybe it was something else?
No, it was the best feeling in the world. I mean, it was an undescribable feeling. The academy is 6.5 weeks long. Uh, the success rate out of 100, you know, 20 to 30 people are going to quit. And that wasn't an option for me. I had no other option other than to graduate that academy, and the mind games that were played, and the training that you went through, and uh, the breaking down that they do as an individual, and then how you're able to to rise, as the academy gets longer and they've seen that you're going to be able to graduate and you're worthy of wearing that Texas tan uniform. It was the greatest feeling in the world, and it's hard to replicate that. I don't know that n- next to having children, that is probably the one of the highlights of my life.
Did you have a chance to reconnect with your parents or family members at all after that, or what was that relationship?
I had always maintained a relationship with my mom. She would send periodic letters, so I knew more or less where she was at. Um, whether either be in jail or in a halfway house or a treatment center, but ultimately she ended up in and out of the state hospital in San Antonio. Um, so I would periodically go visit her there, and then she ended up in a place, equivalent of the state hospital, but it was a residence where, she would live and somebody would help administer her medication, and she was on Social Security, so they paid for that. My father and I didn't have much of a relationship. After I became a state trooper, I really distanced myself from him, only because, well, there's two reasons, but primarily because he was still a criminal, and secondly is because I didn't like the way he manipulated my grandmother. He used to always use the poor me approach, and I saw this happening. And it created a lot of animosity because I would see my grandmother give in to him. And going back to my high school days and junior high days when, we were or I was involved in some type of sports activity. My grandmother didn't have money to give us for dinners if, we had to travel out of town and the bus would stop at a local restaurant wherever we played. You can go into the Dairy Queen or the fast food place to have food. And a lot of times I didn't get to eat, unless it was for that, graciousness of some other family that saw that I didn't have the means to do that. And it was because my grandparents gave their money to my dad and my uncles, or, you know, we just didn't have it. So, you grow up with a lot of anger and you grow up with a lot of resentment. And I was able to really channel that after graduating the DPS Academy.
You were chasing the awards and accolades, and you felt that high when you got them. But obviously, you had an amazing career. So once 2012 depression, drinking problem, and other demons caught up with you, what happened to you after that?
I had always been a big workout guy. That was kind of my outlet, and church. So I walked into a gym at the time, and it happened to be a CrossFit gym. Was just CrossFit was just kind of exploding around the San Antonio area. So I figured I would try something different, and walked in and met Roland. And Roland and I took to each other right away. Um, he came from a lot of the background that I did. Uh, he was a very successful attorney in the San Antonio area. Um, and him and I became very close friends. Um, and the friendship was based on just that, a friendship. He was a strong believer in God, and so through our friendship, I was able to, for the first time in my life, become vulnerable. And what I mean by that is to be able to articulate and express, the deepest, darkest feelings and secrets that I had held that I had to, I guess, contend with. Um, and I just felt comfortable with visiting with Roland, and through an 8-year friendship, uh, you know, I was able to really learn to let go. I was able to learn to forgive, not only my parents, but and my grandparents, but more importantly, I was able to forgive myself. And that's where my healing began. Um, we would travel quite regularly. You know, during our friendship, I met my wife, um, and it was all, and I give you know all of that through God sending Roland to me to really kind of put me on a path where I could really clean that closet out per se.
One person can positively affect your life, whether it was that state trooper that helped you out when you were a teenager, or Roland, do you want to share your story how you were leading over 150 people on the Mexican border and what happened after that?
When I'm in San Antonio and I meet at the time my wife, we dated for a while, and once I knew I was mentally ready, I decided to promote. So I became a first line supervisor within DEA and ran a couple different groups here in San Antonio, where I had the distinct privilege and honor to be trusted by young men and women to go out and do the Lord's work. And it wasn't because of me, it was because of them. Um, that we were very successful uh, and very blessed to do some great work in the San Antonio area. Uh, After doing that for 4 years, I went to, or my wife and I and our newborn children went to our special operations division in Virginia, where I was able to partake in investigations in Mexico, Central America, and Canada, um, and the US. In 2019, when COVID hit, I again was promoted and we went to McAllen, Texas, uh, where that position oversaw McAllen, Brownsville, and Corpus, 21 counties, roughly 150 people, a couple $1 million budget. In that regard, I was charged with overseeing operations, and, community liaison, which I took a lot of pride in. Unfortunately, in those positions of executive levels, um, you can't make everybody happy all of the time. And there is a lot of competition. The law enforcement community is what they call type A personalities, just people that are extremely aggressive, extremely competitive, um, and folks that have the desires to promote for the wrong reasons see individuals that have been successful and do their best to ensure that they're taken out of the way per se. And one of the ways they do that is they file anonymous complaints. And one of the complaints that was filed, and I say one because there was a couple, but one that really stings the most, even to this day, was one that was said that I was, conducting extramarital affairs, creating hostile work environments, stealing money from informants, um, and it was a very disappointing time in my life, because I had devoted by this time almost 25 years to law enforcement. Um, had never been accused of any of those things, nor had the desire to even think about doing those things. And it was all because people didn't want to see me promote to the next level. And it was just, uh, you can't help but go back, to your childhood and the challenges that you faced. And you think like, man, why is I've been loyal to the agency. I've been loyal to the people that have worked for me. I've been loyal to the ones that gave me an opportunity and promoted me. Why did these things happen? And you turn to your faith and you got to remind yourself that, hey, look, you know, even Jesus' disciples turned on him. What would make me think that someone will not turn on me? So you got to keep it in perspective and you got to be humble about it. And you just know that you have to continue moving forward. And it was tough. It was tough on more so on my wife because she saw the way I was emotionally drained and distraught and hurt more than anything. Because at the end of the day, you find out who wrote the letters, and they're people that you think were your friends that are not your friends, and it was just disheartening to see that that's the way it happened. So after being in McAllen 4 years, it came to a point to where I told my wife, I think I'm ready to retire, or maybe we'll go back foreign. And I was given that opportunity, and an individual by the name of Greg Millard, who I think very highly of, I admire and I respect, uh, selected me to go to Europe, where we went to Europe and we lived in Brussels, Belgium, and we enjoyed Europe for a year. And at the time, at that moment, I was just done. I couldn't do it anymore. I just wanted to be away from all the chaos that had become normal life for me. And it was just time for myself to be a dad, to be a husband, and give back in different ways.
How did you rebuild your identity, and not let your job and your all of the things that you were involved in let you define you? And obviously, you were missing that. How did that go?
I get emotional thinking about it. But as my children, yeah. So I keep things in perspective in a way that, when I retired and I'm sitting here thinking to my wife and talking to her saying, hey, I think I want to go back and work on my master's. I want to do something that, at the end of the day, I can continue to um, give back and make myself a little bit more marketable in the executive world. Uh, and my son, who's 8, is overhearing this conversation, and he goes, "Hey, Dad, I got an idea." And I said, "What's that, son?" He says, "Why don't you just be a dad?" And what do you say? You know what I mean? It's like, just be a dad. And it's a priceless saying to some, but for me was so impactful that is at the end of the day the best rewarding job that I've been given, considering where I've come from, not having parents, being abused physically, emotionally, to have my son say, "Hey, just be a dad." That sums up my life right there in transition. Well, I've also been the author of 3 books, the most recent one, Chasing the High, which I could not have done without my wife and Eddie Weiss and 1910 Publishing, which are all available on oneteamg.com, my website. Feel free to reach out to me anytime on LinkedIn and Richard T. Sanchez. Whatever you need, I'm here, and I'm very thankful again to being able to spend this time with you.